for takeoff.
Hello, once again, everybody. This is the Kings of the Heart podcast. My name is Tariq Omari Walton, and I am a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist. And you know what? This podcast is all about relationships, making sure that you are figuring out how to form more healthy relationships. And to do this, we not only have the kings, we also have the queens. And this is what we call the Royal Cypher. And when we do that, you know what we do? We bring in, like I said, our queens. And I will first begin with the one and only Miss Weena Wise. Weena, how you doing,
y'all.
lady?
Hey, what's up, Tyreek?
Welcome back, welcome back. And of course, we also have Miss Anisha Prasad. You have to come off the mic. You have to come off mute, man. You have to come off mute.
Sorry.
There she goes.
Always a pleasure to be here. Missing John, though.
Yeah, I know. We need John back, but we know we'll have him again soon. So it will be the whole royal family, the Cypher. Anyway, guys, how's everybody been?
Oh, I've been booked and busy, and also working on my new podcast.
Oh, tell us about the podcast, Weena Wise.
Oh man, long time coming. Lots of false starts, but if at first you don't succeed, try again.
We know you are tenacious and persistent, so
Yeah, just had to get the right dynamic going. And so excited to introduce the Wise Ones podcast. I think we're on episode 4 now, and myself and my lovely co-host Jamise McGowan are currently recapping this exciting new show that Peacock aired called Couple to Thruple, where
Just saw
4
that.
couples, on a remote island are trying to navigate bringing a third person into their romantic relationship. So it gives us a lot of racy information to process, and it's really helping folks to understand in their own twosome some of the things you need to think about when you're blending, which I think is a good segue for today's topic because
definitely.
take it away, Tyreek.
Yeah, so if you have been listening to the Kings of Heart podcast for the past few episodes, Dr. John and we miss you, Dr. John. Hope you feel better and see you soon. We were talking about moving in together, shacking up, and what that looks like from all these different perspectives. And we had it as a 2-parter because there's so many different topics to cover. And as part of part 3, we saved this specifically for the Royal Cypher. We want to make sure our sisters were here to talk about these 2 particular topics as it relates to moving in together. The first one is blended families. We haven't covered that yet. What it looks like when you have children and your mate has children and you all come under one roof together. So we want to get into that. But we also want to talk about cultural differences because there are so many different perspectives within culture that may play a role in the way that you're able to relate to one another or get along within your household. Very different perspectives, backgrounds, experiences. We want to get into all those things. So we want to save that for you guys. I'm glad you're here to talk about it.
Thank you.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we start off with blended families? I want to just jump right into it with blended families. First, give a description from your perspective what it means to be a blended family and what it is that it takes to bring everybody under that roof in a peaceful manner. Just like the transition into the house together. Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I'll say a blended family basically is when the 2 of you have children of your own. You each have kids, and now you are coming together under one roof as one family.
Okay.
Weena?
Yeah.
Did you add anything to that?
I mean, you just hit it right on the head that not only just kids, but I believe that marriage is the joining of 2 families. And by that, it means the in-laws. And so when you're even choosing a mate, you should not necessarily think about your marriage in isolation or a bubble, just me and my partner, but you also need to be thinking about the community around each other and how you all are going to mesh and integrate. But yes, the kids living under the same roof, that's going to be important. But sometimes we're bringing elderly parents with us.
Yes.
We're bringing folks who can't afford to live on their own in the family with us. And so it does extend to a larger picture than just kids sometimes.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you're
and I
right.
want to bookmark that because I think that when we start talking about the cultural piece, that's huge, right?
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I just want to make sure people understand that we're not just talking about people who are getting married and moving in together. This
Yeah.
is anybody who's shacking up. It's could be like we talked about in previous episodes. It could be a thing of convenience and finances where you guys are just together and
yeah,
haven't decided to get married yet, and what that looks like. So you have a lot of people who bring their families, like you said, extended families even into the picture, and you haven't even crossed into marriage or that discussion yet. It's just, okay, we're all under one roof. And what
True
does that
that.
look like? Right?
True that.
I think one of the biggest challenges that I see when you're just kind of living together, but you're bringing two families together, you know, each other's children, is you may be clear on what the status of the relationship is, but the
Hmm.
kids are not always.
Good point.
Mm,
So it's one thing for you to be married and this is my stepmom or my stepfather, you know what I mean? Like where there's kind of a title, a role, a sense of what that is. When you just move in, sometimes that's a little murky, a little
Right.
ambiguous, and it can be a little more challenging for the kids to adjust and to accept that other person. Like, who are they
Right.
to me? Um, and so all those boundaries around discipline and that stuff can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really important. Clarity. When you think about when people are moving in together, particularly when you're involving people more than just a couple, that you have to have a lot of clarity around who everybody is to each other. So how do you establish that? Or back up a little bit. Before we get into how you work through those things, why don't we talk about some of the things that get in the way or complicate blending families, bringing everybody into the same house? So, what are some of the things that make it a hard transition?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
Uh, babies' mamas and babies' daddies.
Uh-huh. Good point.
So,
Dig into
Yeah.
that a little
right,
bit.
Yes.
right. The children's other parent
Hmm.
Hmm.
is such an important consideration because it's a possibility that you were actually in relationship with them at some point. Some pregnancies occur from relationships that don't turn out to be significant, but some pregnancies occur in marriages what we thought was going to go the distance, and so now there is a separation and custody agreements or parenting agreements, and that other parent actually gets a say in where
You're
their
right.
kids live and who they live with, who they're exposed to. And so it can be difficult at times when you think about moving in with someone else who isn't the child's or children's parent, because you're going to actually have to navigate a conversation and an ongoing transaction with that other parent about blending into another family with somebody new.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
can imagine that. That has to be a really hard conversation to have with somebody. Like, I'm taking your children and I'm moving in with somebody else who's not you. And being on the other side receiving that, like, I don't know how comfortable I am with that.
That's
Whether I've
right.
met the other person or not, I
Hmm.
can imagine being very not just defensive, but what's it called when you're protective. Want to be very
Yeah,
protective of your children and what that may be and how they may be affected or impacted by this new person. I can only imagine what that would be like. What have you seen, Anisha, in terms of that particular point with some of your clients?
Well, yeah, I mean, it varies. Some people navigate it very well and some people don't. Some people feel very resentful, like I shouldn't have to ask permission. This is my life. You chose not to be a part of
True.
it. And, I'm moving on. And then trying to figure out how to engage the other parent. Um, some people want to keep it clean, like that's, these are your children. And so I'm not going to be involved with that piece. Some people, definitely want to make sure that they engage right away and have, the parents meet,
Yeah.
talk about what's going on, because again, like, there's so much variability in it. So you have different custody arrangements where the kids, you've got moving parts. So
Right.
you might have some kids that are with you constantly, but some that move in and out, like they're here every other weekend, or alternating weeks. And so some people, I think the ideal situation would be for the parents to all get together, right?
Hmm.
Including um, the partner that's moving in, like that we become part of the village.
Yeah.
We have discussions about what this looks like, so that things get reinforced as they move back and forth between homes, and there's clear understanding and open lines of communication.
Yeah. What are some other, I want to get back to the transition point, but I also want to talk about what are some things that you need to consider, about blending your family, bringing, your family in with another family under one roof. What are some considerations you want to have and discuss before even making that decision?
I would definitely say space, right? Really
How so?
thinking about where everyone's going to be.
Ah,
Yes.
right. Oh
Thinking
gosh,
through
yeah.
equity, and kind of that fairness, and who's sharing rooms, and all of that really needs to be taken into consideration when you have kids involved. And the space that you choose, like, you make sure that people, the children have space that represents them and where they feel like they belong.
Right.
That's
What do
a
you think,
great
man?
point. That's a
Hmm.
great point because as you think about who's moving where, if you are moving with your children into the other person's pre-existing space or
Oh,
vice versa,
Hmm.
it's really important that the child who or children who are moving into the pre-existing space, also they get that say and they get that space that helps them to make it their own. As you're
Hmm.
hmm,
saying, they're
right.
already being uprooted from the home that they currently live in, but then to land in a space that hasn't been well thought out and well appropriated for them, it makes for a really, really hard landing instead
Hmm.
of a soft landing, which is what we always want.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I remember when my father and my stepmother, got married, and I have an older stepbrother who's 5 years older than me. Now, mind
Hmm.
you, at the time, I'm 7 years old, and he's 12, about to turn 13, and we're going to share a room. Now, we're talking about two only children
Wow.
Yes.
with
Yeah.
that kind of gap in age at that time in your lives, moving
Yeah.
into one little space together. And of course, we had bunk beds, and my brother's huge. He's like, 6 foot when he's like 12, 13 years old.
Wow.
So he takes up a lot of room. But I
Yeah.
can only imagine from his perspective, I gotta live with this little kid, this little whiny kid,
Yeah.
who's coming
And you were
from,
extra whiny, I know it.
no comment. So so I can only imagine how
Hmm.
that felt for him. I'm sure he's told me. I just, kind of buried it somewhere. But yeah, you want to consider what's this going to look like when you're bringing these kids into this household. Do you have enough room for everybody? And if not, how are people going to feel when the room that they used to have in their old home has been diminished to fit your desires, not
Yeah.
necessarily mine, because we don't really have a choice in this.
Right.
It's what you want, right?
Right.
Other thing to think about too is meals and cooking and food,
Hmm.
right? Because everyone may have a very different taste palette. And so I know for me, I was coming from living with my mother in Brooklyn where we didn't eat pork or beef. Now moving in this household where pork and beef are a regular thing,
Yeah.
particularly liver. I never liked the liver thing.
No.
There's a really hard transition to eating liver. But even those things, who's going to be doing the cooking, and what are we actually going to be eating, right?
Mm.
Yeah, well, all of those things, all of that has to be negotiated. Like,
Yeah.
with every household, there are certain rules
Hmm.
and certain rhythms that will be new to these children who are coming together. Um, you have a motivation as the partner to do this to, make the compromises and changes because you're in love and, you've made this
Right.
choice. But like you said, these kids didn't make this choice. And yet this has been forced upon them.
Right.
So I think that ideally, depending on their age, like engaging them in the process would be helpful.
In what
Um,
ways? Like, how would you engage them?
Talking about what things that they would like to see and need and what would allow them to feel a part of it, talking about chores and who does what, uh,
Mm,
kind of involving them as soon as possible in, saying this is your home too.
right. Right.
I
What do you
like
think
the
about
idea of a probationary period. You
that? Mm,
know, people might come for me, but when you are uprooting the life of your children and they're now going to a new school or they're living in a different space and they have to get along with other kids that have different temperaments, there's got to be a grace period where some real adjustments need to be made, and you need to be checking in to make sure that all of that is going smoothly.
mm-hmm.
And on some levels, if you go into the situation feeling like it has to work no matter what, I think unfortunately you put the entire family in a situation where there's really no room for honesty.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah,
Because
that's a lot of
if
pressure.
the kids, right, if the kids temperaments don't mesh well, if your kids are becoming depressed, if they don't have enough space, and for the foreseeable future this is the way it's going to be, you end up forcing them into a space of silence.
Mm,
So being willing to say we're going to try the living situation
right.
and we're going to actually check back in after a month, 3 months, 6 months, and see if it works. That's something that is best practice. It might not always be the practice,
Right.
but you gotta be willing, depending on how you feel about the health and safety of everybody, to take an honest look at whether or not the transition is going smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we also have a listener, happens to be my wife. She's actually watching right now, and she said, um, other than great point for you,
Ah,
Common
common
ground.
grounds for discipline, right?
Yes.
So also taking that in consideration, how are you going to share the
100%.
responsibilities around disciplining children? Because we know that can be a very sensitive topic. Oh, now I'm thinking about the parent who doesn't live in a household. You're bringing my household, you're bringing my child into another household, and that person's going to be disciplining my child,
Right.
right? But
Right.
what are some of the considerations you need to make around disciplining the children? Shared discipline.
I think that the way you think about disciplining is really indicative of your personality in the relationship, and partners who come together with kids, it starts to play out amongst how you allow the kids to move and be in the household.
Mm,
So if you're an indulgent parent in general, your type of disciplining is probably going to be reflective of that.
yeah.
So, oh, I let the kids get 5 strikes before I really come in, and I may never come in heavy handed with the kids,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
I feel like we talk about it, they have room to push back on me, and I just want everybody to be happy,
Hmm.
right? That's indicative
Happy
of
and free.
Right. That's
Right.
indicative of who you are as a person most times. And couples can see certain things playing out. And then you got the other partner who believes in routines, regiments,
Structure.
rules, structure, boundaries.
Right.
And that translates to how they parent their kids. What that looks like is a lot of discussion on the front end of that relationship. Those discussions need to happen before anybody packs a single box and moves in with each other. And it's
Hmm.
inevitable that you are going to find yourself in situations after you've moved in where you're kind of learning on the go
Mhm.
and you see the differences happening and they're playing out in real time. But that calls for a lot of back bedroom conversations as well. The
Right.
rule has to be that when we see a problem brewing and we don't quite know what the best practice is for each other in the situation with disciplining the kids, we take a time out and we go into the master bedroom or the back room and we have a sidebar and we
Mhm.
try to get on the same page and align with how we're going to handle it. And the best thing is that in that moment, you don't have to make a rash or immediate decision. We
Mm,
can come back and say, you know what? We need a timeout. Something's coming down the pipeline on this one, but
mm,
we need to get ourselves in line before we render any verdict on this.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it can be hard to do though, and I do know that, like some people are just very easily triggered, right? So
how
if you
so?
hear, um, well, just becoming very protective of their
Okay,
children. You hear
right,
someone who's not
Yeah,
their parent raise their voice,
right, true.
or approach in what you perceive as an aggressive manner toward your child. It's like, wait, 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 what we doing?
right,
Like you want to intervene like right then. Like you're saying, Weena, I think ideally we'd have that sidebar out of the presence of the kids. But
Yeah,
there's something kind of instinctual that comes when you say, like, no, I don't, you're not going to talk to my kid like that.
right,
right.
right.
And then, also a feeling of preferential treatment or different treatment.
Yeah,
Like you're
Hmm.
much harder with this one than that one. The kids may perceive that or see that, like um, the way you speak to your kids is different than the way you speak to my kids.
yep.
So it is a very very tender subject. Whether you're just shacking up or remarrying and blending families, like that's discipline is a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I tell my clients when they are blending families, that when it comes to discipline, first the new person coming in to the relationship, into this family, this dynamic, there needs to be again a what's the term you use, Weena? Child
Onboarding.
child child period, yeah,
Oh, the
onboarding,
Oh,
probationary period.
probationary
probationary.
period, right?
Absolutely.
Where whatever issue there is with that particular child, if you don't have a relationship with them, they're not going to be responsive to you. So
Love
you
it.
need time to actually build that
Yes.
relationship with that child before you even try or attempt to discipline
Yes.
them. Because if you come in hard and they don't know you like that, I
Hmm.
mean, just between the hurt, the fear that develops from that, the distance, the resentment that you may never get over. I've heard stories about people saying, my stepfather came in or my stepmother came in and they were really hard. Oh, the whole Cinderella thing. They were really hard. And here it is 20 years later and they're still resentful. They never built a strong relationship with that new parent because of how rough they came in as disciplinarians. And for some people, for some of the other parents, I've seen this with my LGBTQ clients. You have one where the mother of the child will come in expecting her mate now to be the disciplinarian. Like that's her expectation. I want you to be the disciplinarian. I'm bringing you in here to be the disciplinarian. The mate's like, yo, hold on, I don't know your kid like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you have to manage those expectations. So there needs to be a relationship that develops between the child and the new parental figure before you can even begin to explore discipline.
And I think that absolutely 100%. And I think that gets to, we know what you were saying about the necessity of having those conversations ahead of time and
Right.
really communicating expectations. Because I've seen it where, um, like, let's say there's a child, the gender pairing, right? So the
Hmm.
new partner coming in is the same gender as the child of the parent, right?
Okay.
And there's an expectation of what that relationship is going to look like.
Right.
So if it's a girl and I'm bringing in my, female partner, you're going to do her hair and you're going to, kind of build and nurture a relationship around, kind of the rituals that females and women do.
Right.
Um, and the new partner coming in may not be comfortable, may
Yeah.
not be sure of what the boundaries are,
May not
maybe
know
there's
how to
some
do hair.
tension. Yeah, oh yeah, don't know how to do hair, are
Don't
not,
make assumptions
kind of
now.
into those things themselves, or
Right.
there's some tension from the other parent, right? And so they're
Right.
reticent on how to engage. And so I see sometimes um, like a real disconnect between what's expected and what's communicated. right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's some ideals around what this going to look like and what your role is going to be as this, child's other adult in their life. And I think it requires some good talking through ahead of time before you cross the threshold.
Right.
I couldn't agree more. And I think when children coming in are at very different ages and stages,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
also requires a lot of communication.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have the older children and you're coming into a situation where you're going backward, you now have to repeat some phases and stages with raising kids. The assumption may be that, oh, you're fine with it. You've been here, done that before. And you may be thinking, yeah, I actually didn't want to repeat. Like I'm out of the woods. This is going to
Mm-hmm.
be hard for me to have to come back and do this again. Even when kids are the same age, they can have such different temperaments
Hmm.
that assuming that one child is going to be like the other child because this is your experience, that's something that could lead to a lot of confusion.
And
So
conflict.
communication, yep, communication is so important because every kid is going to need something different.
Right.
Yes.
The thing that Anisha said earlier that kind of skipped by, the term that I like is negotiation.
Hmm.
No, so
Mm.
as you're making this transition into everyone living together, everyone coming under the same roof, there needs to be a lot of negotiation because you are a different kind of parent than I am. So we need to negotiate what these things are going to look like. We have to talk about what disciplining looks like. You may be a yeller, you may be a beater, you may be someone who's a lot more lax. There could be
Oh, it's
so many
a
different.
lot of
But
beaters.
I'm a mandated reporter, so I don't know how that's going to work. Joking.
But these are conversations that people have to have because
Yeah.
people do really come from a different perspective. So there
Mhm,
needs to be negotiation around that. There needs to be negotiation around discipline,
mhm.
around meals, around bedtime, around structure when it comes to homework. You know, visitation with the other parent. Can they
Allowance.
allowance if you're actually doing it because I don't know how many anyway. Chores,
Yeah.
all those things. There has to be a lot of negotiation between the couple, and you may want to include the kids in some respects, but there has to be a lot of negotiation between the parents about what this is going to look like. You can't come into this thinking it's going to your household now is going to look like what your household looked like before. Even if everyone's moving into your space, you have to negotiate what everything's going to look like for everybody because again, it's not just your space anymore. It's a shared space. So
It's
how does
it's a
that look for
shared
everybody?
everything. This
Yeah,
is
it's a shared
such a
experience.
web, right? It's a web that extends to every aspect of coming together,
Hmm.
Mhm.
even the finances,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Right, meaning the kids are now doing basketball, ballet, soccer, jazz, piano,
right.
and
Who's paying for
then
this?
right, who's paying for this? But then also one household, the parent lets the kids get $40 haircuts, $50 sets of nails, lashes, and they get
Hmm.
a new pair of Jordans, 5 times a year. And the
Right,
other household, the parent is like, yeah, we're not doing any of that.
right.
That is tough, but you are blending experiences and you have to figure out how to make allowances for some of the things that you might not really believe in.
Yeah,
Mhm,
right. Like
mhm.
I have to neglect my kid now. I can't get my kid Jordans because you don't want your kid to have Jordans. So my kid
Right.
has to
Suffer.
suffer because of what you the limits you want to place on your kids. I mean, there's so much to negotiate. I can't
Yeah.
only yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So
But I
let's
think though, I wanted to interject in here.
okay.
One of the challenges, because some of the things we're talking about is just blended families, period.
Hmm.
Right? Whether you getting married or just living together. I think one of the challenges I see in blended families when you're just living together is the ease with which they separate. Meaning, divorce, like you take a little bit more time to kind of work through it, think through it, and
Right. You might
but
be a little more invested in staying together.
correct.
Right.
Um, but it can be so incredibly disruptive
Hmm.
when people who are just living together that just separate. For
Mm.
the
Yeah.
kids, I mean, it's uprooting everything. Like, suddenly, we have a big argument and like, get out, just leave. And like we're literally packing up our stuff and we're
Right.
leaving.
Right.
Um, and so I think I have seen that, quite frequently where, um, lease is not like the timing of things, like it's not necessarily as considerate of the needs of the kids
Hmm.
in that way. Like we'll just move.
Right.
And that it could be different school, like it's a lot. It's a whole cascade of things.
Right.
So true.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very mature decision to make because if you're just operating off of emotions and you know how that goes, where you can just split in a second, then yeah, you are going to disrupt not just your own life, but yeah, the life of your children, their children. You don't know what kind of relationship they've developed, and now you're pulling them apart. You know, I've known of blended families where two kids, two, three kids are coming into the picture, and they develop a very strong bond, and now you guys break up. Are the kids no longer supposed to communicate?
Well, yeah, that's an important part too, right? So if you're married, and well, if these are your kids, right, there's
Mhm.
custody and an expectation that we will continue that relationship. Obviously, I'm still your parent. When you are not a parent, we're
Right.
not even married,
Right.
but we break up. We've been living together for the past 7 years. I've been in part of your child's life since they were 3.
Right.
Because we're beefing, now that relationship is completely cut off. Like this
Yeah.
child has suffered a loss.
Right.
And so that's sometimes like hugely terrible in terms of navigating those things, and people need to keep that in mind before you bring kids into it. Know that you're in it for the long haul. Like if you're going to invest and say, you need to respect this person as, another adult in your life or whatever, then that you are accepting this child in your life for the long haul, no matter what happens in the relationship. And I
Right.
don't feel like that happens. Like a lot of times, like it'll just be a complete cutoff.
Hmm. I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier, but you talked about bringing other family members into the household, right? Maybe
Yeah.
aging
Me.
parents and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I think that would help us make a good transition into cultural
Hmm.
differences that you need to consider when moving in together. And
Hmm.
so, even just to that point, just starting there, what does that look like for couples when you are of a certain generation where your parents are aging and maybe you still have children in the household, you're in that middle generation, and you're bringing people in, you're bringing your parents in, or your expectations to bring parents in, and your mate may struggle with that idea because I knew you were a package deal. I didn't know the package was this big. Question. What? How do you begin to negotiate that kind of dynamic? It's one thing to have your kids come in, but now your parents or your nieces and nephews may have to live with you or other family members. How do you begin to negotiate those kind of dynamics?
You know, I think again, communication is so important here
Hmm.
Hmm.
because as the relationship is unfolding, you're already talking about how your parents' health is going or who you're living with, excuse me, already. And so your partner should be on board. It should never be a surprise that somebody is moving in with them.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Hmm.
then again, this is about the sharing. How do we make enough space for everybody to be comfortable? And when you're making space for everybody to be comfortable, you have to be generous and you have to have a lot of grace going in, knowing that the more people who move in, the more their needs have to be considered all the time.
Right. Right.
Yes. And I want to echo the communication piece. I mean, that is the underpinning of pretty much everything. But it's important to consider your partner's um, wants, needs, desires as it pertains to this, right?
Mhm.
So I can say, well, it's my mom. Of course, she's going to come live here. Well, I do need to discuss it, right? We do need to talk about what that looks like and what
Right.
needs are. Um, for other family members and relatives, there's a crisis, and I'm the caretaker, and so I would welcome them and want to help them. What if my partner doesn't, right?
Mhm.
What How do we, as you said, Tariq, how do we negotiate that?
Right.
I think those are discussions that have to be had.
Mhm. And I think culture can play a big role in that too.
Hmm.
If you are a say African American middle class person from the suburbs of DC, and the expectation is that where again this might be a general stereotype, but just consider this: the expectation is that as your parents are aging, we may put them in a facility, right? We have the resources. This has been the plan. We put them in a facility. But if you're married to someone who is, say, of Middle Eastern descent or Asian descent, and culturally, the idea is that the parent comes to stay with you as they age, that's the
Mhm.
expectation, that's the obligation and responsibility.
Mhm.
Well, how do we negotiate that? I'm coming in thinking, well, it makes sense that we have the resources. Let's put them in a facility where they can be taken care of more than we can take care of them. And the other person's like, well, no, in our family, the expectation is, or in our culture, the
Mhm.
expectation is that the parent comes and live with you when they age. How do you begin to even walk that tightrope?
It's one of those crosses you just have to bear.
Mhm.
And every relationship is different and it comes with its own unique set of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to live, they also come with their opinions, they come with their rituals, they come with all types of things. So moving in with the in-laws, it can be a beautiful experience that
Mm-hmm.
builds community and helps with the kids. And sometimes having the in-laws move in means that you have a actual parent coming in who doesn't necessarily see you as an adult and they may have a lot of
Yeah,
opinions about how things should go and they're trying to raise the grandkids as if they're their own kids, so that is an ongoing challenge.
It
yeah,
truly is. And I think that, about the cultural piece, it could be religious differences. Let's
yep,
say, and I've had this where one of the partners, the way they grew up, their religious beliefs don't support living together before you're married.
mm-hmm,
Mm-hmm.
But they've made some concessions. Maybe it's economics or I just love you, I'm afraid to lose you, whatever, whatever, and they do it. And there's always this cognitive dissonance. But their family that they're coming from still holds those beliefs.
right,
And so there's, the potential for a lot of tension and negativity in moving forward. And as you said, like the cross cultural piece, where some cultures, it is absolutely expected that we will live in a multi generational way.
right,
It's absolutely expected that our resources, like your money is not just your money, like it's our money. And
yeah,
I'm talking about
yeah,
the extended family.
yeah,
And so that all needs to be talked about and addressed,
yeah.
preferably before you cross the threshold.
Before. But like you said, some people are just so in love that they're not thinking about this. They're not making these kind of considerations because, we're just together and we'll figure it out when we get there. And then you get there and like, oh, there is a lot more to consider. I didn't
Mhm,
think about how our backgrounds may play a role in how we're trying to set up our homes and how we want to live together. What are some other considerations you have to take when it comes to those differences in cultures? So religions, ethnicities, nationalities. What are some other considerations
Mm.
as it relates to culture?
Ooh, you know, I live in a family where um, some of my family members have married outside of their race, outside
Hmm.
of our race, and the daily way that people take in information and process things like political affiliations
Oh
or
yeah.
privilege and socioeconomic status, it comes out
mhm,
when you sometimes marry outside of your race.
Hmm.
And every day the conversations between those couples looks different
mhm,
because they have to be in a space where they are open to learn and listen
Hmm.
to not only what the other person believes, but the context around it. How I was raised, why I am walking around with this privileged mindset, or I'm in survival mode all the time. I grew up coming from a place of lack. That's not something different that you have to do in relationships where you may be of the same culture. We all need to be able to listen and learn, but it comes across so heavily because race in America is a thing.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
Mhm.
something that we can't ignore. And
Mhm.
so the constant dialogue that has to happen and the constant openness to understand a different political view or a different, financial view, it can be exhausting. And you
Yeah.
Mhm.
need to know that going into the blended situation.
True.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. What do you think, Anisha?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I've seen that, right? Like you may feel like, we're in a good space in our relationship relating to one another, but then something happens. Um, some of the
Yes.
political upheavals, the social unrest that we've had, um, and you reflect on kind of where you are and trying, do you find your partner to be a safe space
Mm.
to process that when there is a difference? Um, like you said, Weena, like just being open to learn, and to really accept and to acknowledge. I mean, sometimes people naively act like it doesn't matter. No, it does. It does.
Mm.
Hmm.
And being
Yes.
willing to take on those, and have those courageous conversations, even in the midst of our coupleness. What does it mean to be Latino and uh, I've got family members on the verge of deportation.
Mm.
I know you love and accept me, but you're voting with a party that supports, like those kind of
Yes.
difficult conversations. Like your home has to be a safe space to
Right.
process that.
I love the
Even
way you
think,
put that.
even thinking about that extended family, we know that there are certain cultures where extended family, even if they're not living in a household, it's important that they're engaged in the family, in your nuclear family, right? That they are playing a role there or they're visiting all the time.
Hmm.
Having that extended family around is very important within certain cultures. And if your culture is a little bit more reserved, a little bit more conservative, that may not be something that you're used to.
Hmm.
And so having
Hmm.
conversations around what that looks like, how often is it cool to have, all these different, do I need to, set ground rules around when I walk in the house, how many people are here?
Yes.
Yes.
Because for you, hey, this is just how we live. This is how we've always lived for generations.
Hmm.
And now we're living together and your expectation is that it's just you and I all the time. That's not what I'm used to,
Hmm.
So even that part of it. Celebrating holidays
Ooh.
is another big one.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Even if you share the same religious affiliation, but you practice differently. And when it comes to holidays and who's coming into your household, what the expectation is for you guys going out, because now if you are living together, people are expecting to see you guys together all the time.
Hmm.
So what are the expectations with that? So what are some of the things that you have to take into consideration when it comes to even religious celebrations within the same household now?
I think the religious discussion should come up very early in
It
the
typically does.
dating relationship.
Right. It does.
Right? It
Hmm.
again, it should be having you should be having that discussion long before you think about packing a box
Hmm.
and moving in. But even when couples think that they have gone over it, you're going to learn on the job sometimes when you get into the
Hmm.
relationship,
Yeah. And what are
into
some of the
those
things you say?
situations.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that splitting time on holidays, that this
Hmm.
is outside parent. Remember, baby's mamas, baby's daddies,
Oh
they may have
goodness.
some religious
Yeah.
beliefs that
Hmm.
dictate that we go here, we do this, we don't eat that,
Right.
yeah, baptisms, do we believe in christenings, do we believe in certain rituals that happen, quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs, all those things that are highly rooted in faith
Hmm.
and that people are willing to die for. Those
Hmm.
are things that you may not be thinking about when you're moving in with someone and your child is 7, but when they turn 13, now you're going to have these conversations, or 15, because that's when these rituals play out.
Right.
Hmm.
And so again, it's this evolving negotiation, as
Yeah.
Anisha said,
Hmm.
around how we just make space for your faith to play out. And sometimes the rule is going to be, if it's not killing anybody, we have to let it happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Do you think, Anisha?
Yeah, like you said, Weena, I think the whole idea of it evolving, and making sure that you have um, healthy, clear, and consistent communication as needs change, as the children grow through different developmental stages, um, and checking in, like, what are our short-term goals, what are our long-term goals, what does family look like? Like, I like with my clients, especially my premarital ones, I like for them to do almost like a mission statement.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
Think about your kids right now when they are adults. What do you want them to be able to say about their home?
right.
What it was like? What are the adjectives that you want them to be able to say? Like, that doesn't happen, kind of randomly. Like, you have to be intentional about creating, I was loved, I was accepted, I was taught that I could be like those things. If that's what you value, then you have to make sure that you are moving in that direction. And so, whether it's blended families, who, when you're coming together to live together, you should have those same discussions about what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
What do you want it to look like?
Exactly. Exactly. So one thing, well, I guess this is our chance to talk about the different things we want to take away from this conversation. So, time for our noble truths. Weena, why don't you start off? What are some of your noble truths about this conversation around moving in together, particularly when it takes into consideration blended families and culture? What are your noble truths?
Establishing rapport is one of the most important things you can do when you're blending a family that extends beyond just you and your partner. You don't make any assumptions about the new people that are going to be sharing space with you. You get to know them, you listen with the openness and the level of grace that makes people feel welcome, because you're going to have a much better living experience if
Mhm,
you do that on the front end.
Right on,
mhm.
right on. How about you, Nisha? What do you have for your noble truth for this week?
I guess what I said earlier about making sure that everyone has space,
Hmm.
psychological and emotional space to be their individual selves and express how they're feeling, but definitely physical space, that feels like I have a place and I belong.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
What
And
about
I
you,
was
Tyreek?
thank you for asking. I appreciate you
That's
asking.
right.
I would say my noble truth for this week is this takes a lot of negotiation, and you
Hmm.
have a lot more to consider than just yourself when it comes to blending families and everyone moving in together. Like Dr. John and I talked about for the previous two episodes, we just talked about basically what are you considering as the couple are moving in together. But when you start talking about blending families, there's so many more conversations you have to have because, again, you're coming from very different backgrounds. And you want to make sure everyone else is on the same page with food, space, discipline. You have to negotiate. You have to make concessions. You have to get to a place where everyone's on that same page. And if you don't do that on the front end, or you're going to suffer on the back end. So those are definitely some things I want you to think about from today's conversation.
Mm.
So well, guys, it is time for us to wrap. So why don't you guys tell everybody what you got going on and how they can find out more about you? Why don't we go ahead and start with Anisha?
Yes, you can find me at growthpointtherapy.com. And yeah, happy to have you in my practice.
All right. What about you, Wina?
Love it, love it, love it. Follow me at Weena Wise, WEENAWISE, on TikTok and Instagram. And definitely check where there are blog posts and resources for couples and individuals and families around mental health. And also check out the Wise Ones podcast on
Let's say you better
Spotify and
tell them.
soon to
Yeah,
be on
Tell
Apple.
them.
absolutely
Tell
will do
them.
that.
Tell them. Tell them. And you guys, you can check me out right here at Kings of the Heart, kingsoftheheart.com, and Kings of the Heart on Spotify and everything else, YouTube. You can also find out more about me and my private practice at insightmft.com, or you can check out my personal webpage, with all my other media stuff at viewsandvibes.com, or just find me, Tyreek Omari, at all of the different social media platforms.
Yep.
Yeah, we're everywhere. We're everywhere. But look at Royal Cypher, thank you guys so much for being here today. Again, Dr. John, we missed you.
John, you're my favorite. That's right. John, you're my favorite.
That's fine. I will not take that person. I can understand why. He's my favorite. But thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we will see you guys again soon.
Bye.
Bye.